And joining us to understand more about what possibly could have happened at Ahmedabad during this tragic crash, joining us is global aviation expert James Healy-Pratt. Mr. Pratt, thank you so much for speaking to us here at Times Now and helping us to understand what could have possibly gone wrong as far as the Dreamliner 7878 is concerned. Judging by the information that's currently before us, what is your estimation of what could have possibly gone wrong?
Well, look, good evening to you. It's very early to start speculating on the causes of this tragedy. I think the first thing we have to think about is the families of the 242 on board who lost their lives, because we're now looking at a recovery and an identification mission, which is tragic for all involved. And the first thing the families want, of course, is to have their loved ones identified and returned to them so that they can grieve. But obviously the second thing after that has happened is the families will want to know, why has this accident happened? We won't know that until the safety investigators from India, and helped by safety investigators from the UK, have recovered the black boxes. So that'll be the digital flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder. Because all we know from the evidence at the moment is that the wings of that Boeing 787 were not generating enough lift. And that could be for a number of reasons. Perhaps they're related to the General Electric American-made engines. Perhaps there wasn't enough thrust. But there are multiple potential causes, and it's very early to start speculating.
Absolutely. And you know, the very fact that both the engine perhaps lost thrust at the same time is an extremely rare occurrence, one that perhaps happens once in a billion times. That's really something that would be extremely surprising if that was indeed the case. I mean, as you said, there could be a number of issues, but one thing that many are also asking is that so soon after takeoff, when the crash happens, there are questions about the checks that happen while the plane is on ground. Wouldn't they have been potentially identified then?
Well, it's standard operating procedure for the crew to make sure the aircraft is airworthy before it takes off. And they would obviously have done weight and balance calculations for the amount of passengers and the fuel. This was a long flight. It was over 9 hours coming into London Gatwick. I live 10 miles from London Gatwick. So the aircraft had a lot of fuel on board. It was a hot day over there, I think 42 degrees centigrade, but the crew should have done their flight computer calculations, and the aircraft should have taken off normally, but obviously something probably catastrophic happened for that aircraft to get no higher than 625 feet above ground level, because it was certainly going at the takeoff speed of, I think, 174 knots, but it didn't gain height, it didn't gain altitude. And the reasons behind that will be found in the evidence of the black boxes. In my experience, over 30 years of investigating air crashes around the world, black boxes will probably give you 90 to 95% of the answers. So it's really important that the safety investigators locate those black boxes, download them, and start telling the families what they think are the causes of this terrible tragedy.
Absolutely. And you know, while of course, as you rightly say, we'll only get the final data, the details from what has happened as far as the flight data recorder and the cockpit voice recorder is concerned, the pilots themselves, if you look at their profiles, have over 10,000 hours of flying amongst themselves. The commander alone, over 7,000 hours. The possibility in such a situation then of it being a human error or a mechanical error, would you say that the possibility of it being a mechanical error would perhaps be more?
Again, it's really difficult to talk about this speculatively without the evidence. You've correctly said that the flight crew had plenty of experience, and yes, they did. In many cases, it can be a chain of causes that creates a tragedy like this. So it's more than one thing, and it may be some problem with the aircraft, and it may then be added to by a problem with the crew. At the moment, we just don't know.
Absolutely. 787s themselves had a lot of difficulties starting off. You can look at the issues attributed to lithium-ion batteries, the incidents of smoke, fires and battery fluid leaks. We're also seen how in 2020, I beg your pardon, there was a structural issue in the circumference fuselage joint of the 787 Dreamliner, and engineers apparently found unacceptably large gaps around the forward pressure bulkhead. Any of these issues that could have recurred in your view, or do you believe that adequate steps were taken to rectify the situation when these problems were identified?
Okay. Yes, you make an interesting point in relation to certain issues that this American Boeing-made aircraft has had. We know they've had battery fires, lithium battery fires. There was one at London Heathrow. I think it was Ethiopian Airlines. We think that problem was solved, and of course there is no evidence here today that any battery fire was involved. The other issue in relation to the pressure bulkhead would only really be relevant if the aircraft actually got above 20,000 feet, because that's when the pressure bulkhead is really important. And this aircraft only got to 625 feet, so pressurization wouldn't have been an issue. So I don't think the prior problems that were known will be relevant to today's tragedy.
Absolutely. And, judging by the visuals coming in of the scale of this tragedy, as well as the very fact that it crashed on top of a medical college, as per the reports coming in, and some of those students getting injured as well, the possibility of survivors does seem extremely bleak in an event such as this. What is your estimation, sir?
Yeah, from my experience, very sadly, I would expect no survivors from the aircraft. I mean, that aircraft was going more than 200 miles an hour, and it impacted a very solid structure, a medical college. So I would be very surprised if there were any survivors. And I believe that press reports are coming in at the moment to confirm that sad fact. I mean, something else that your viewers would be interested in is that I was involved in the recent Boeing 737 MAX accidents related to Lion Air and Ethiopian Airlines, and there were some serious issues with the Boeing flight control software. But again, it's important to remember this is a 787, the Dreamliner. It's the first fatal total loss that this aircraft type has suffered in over 15 years. And so I don't think that the issues are going to be similar to that of the 737. But again, the important thing we all need to wait for will be the black box downloads.
Absolutely. And, my question to you is this, that if there are indeed mechanical issues that either Boeing or the airline can identify at the earliest, is there a need, or would there be potentially a need to ground aircraft? Of course, we have seen in the case of the 737 MAX that the fleet was grounded for a considerable period of time globally. What's the possibility or the procedure if that is to indeed happen in the case of this aircraft as well?
Yeah, well, you correctly tell your viewers about the 737 grounding. It didn't happen after the first loss of life. It took the second loss of life to occur. I think Boeing would be more cautious here if evidence emerged from the black boxes that there was a serious airworthiness issue related to the Boeing aircraft. And don't forget, it's got American-made engines. They're General Electric Gen X engines. So I cannot emphasize enough how important the evidence from the black box data will be. And one would hope that the Indian safety authorities will be telling us within the next 48 hours that they've located the black boxes, and then usually it takes another 7 days to download that data.
Right. We've seen the New York Times also come out and report that the FAA said last year that it was investigating claims by a Boeing engineer who said that sections of the fuselage of the 787 Dreamliner were improperly fastened together and could break apart mid-flight after thousands of trips. Of course, entirely speculative once again, but the very fact that someone from Boeing has chosen to raise this issue, how much of an issue could that be in this event, or how much of a role could have played in this particular plane crash?
Okay. Yeah, again, an interesting point that you raise. The video evidence that I've seen and you've seen and your viewers have seen, that aircraft was in one piece. when it was unable to gain altitude. And what you see is an aircraft gently descending into the building. There was no in-flight breakup, and so I don't think that the issues in relation to fatigue of the fuselage are relevant at the moment. Well, obviously I could be wrong, but just looking at the clear digital evidence, that aircraft was in one piece. The wings were not generating enough lift, and one of the reasons for that is that the engines weren't producing enough power for whatever reason. But I don't think that that is related to issues with the aircraft fuselage or fatigue.
Right, and also given the fact that there are a number of passengers from the UK who are aboard that particular aircraft, from the point of view of the United States, from the UK government, I beg your pardon, what would be the procedure from here on in terms of actually reaching out to the Indian authorities and looking into possible causes of this particular crash as well?
Okay. Well, in my experience, the Foreign Office in London will ask the UK DVI team, Disaster Victim Identification Team, specialist police officers to assist. They'll travel to India and they'll assist the recovery teams with the recovery and the identification of the British nationals. That's a grim and terrible job to do, but they do it very efficiently. And that will then permit repatriation of the British nationals to the UK. Once that repatriation happens, there will be a coroner's inquest, so a coroner will be instructed to commence an investigation into the causes of this tragedy for the 53 British families, and that investigation will take some time.
Right. James, I'd also like to ask you, in terms of those who frequently fly or those who are going to be boarding several of these aircraft either today or in coming days, that is a 787-8 Dreamliner, what would your advice be? Because there's going to be a considerable amount of concern and perhaps, particularly amongst those who are taking those flights as to whether they should be worried. What would your word or your advice be to them?
Okay. My general advice is that today has been a terrible tragedy, and we remember that first and foremost for those families of the 242. But in the greater context, flying is the safest form of transport. And an accident like this usually happens about 1 in 13 million times. So everyone on board today was very, very unlucky. And for those who are concerned or anxious as passengers getting on a Boeing Dreamliner, it is highly unlikely that this will happen again sometime soon. Again, we come back to the black boxes, and it's really important that those are found, they're downloaded, and that the Indian authorities, helped by the British authorities, the AAIP in Farnborough in England, that information is then sent out publicly so that the travelling public can be informed about what the causes are.
All right, James Healy-Pratt, who's an aviation partner with Keystone Law London, thank you so much for taking your time out and explaining this up and breaking this down for all of our viewers. Thank you so much indeed.
Thank you. Good evening.